Welcome to The Author Show, where we present new authors and books. From fiction to self-help and everything in between, you'll find it all here. To watch the TV version of our program, visit authorswebtv.com. That's authorswebtv.com. And now, let the show begin.
Hi, this is Linda Thompson, your host for The Author Show. You're recently divorced. You live a boring life, work a boring job, and then one day you're given a ticket for a cruise. To say that's only the tip of the iceberg of our story would be a mass understatement. In his novel, You Got to Have You Some Fun, author Andrew Harkless takes us on a wild and crazy ride that challenges you in ways you can't imagine. Let's find out how. Andrew, welcome to The Author Show.
Hi, Linda. Thanks for having me.
Andrew, please give us a quick overview of You Got to Have You Some Fun.
You Got to Have You Some Fun. I kind of like to think of it as a coming-of-age story for a middle-aged man. I think as a culture, we tend to think of coming-of-age stories as just being teenagers or college age. I think we can come of age at any age. I think in your 40s and your 50s, you're always coming into something new. You're having to change and adapt. That's one of the major themes in the book is change. The main character is an uber boring man, but by the end of the 8-day cruise, he's a totally different character. He's coming into his own.
There's a lot of humor in your title. Did you carry that humor throughout your book, and is there a serious side as well?
There is. I tried to blend a lot of different genres so I could reach every type of reader. There's equally as much as adventure, love story, friendship, comedy, drama, loss, and one of the major sub-themes of the novel is about, since I've worked for 2 different cruise lines before as a bartender, I know firsthand what it's like kind of pulling the curtain back behind the wizard. So as a subplot in the novel, I expose what it's like to work on the cruise lines and what actually happens that passengers might not be familiar with.
How would you describe your writing style in You Got to Have You Some Fun?
Well, my idol is John Irving, so I'd like to think it's along those lines, but I think that would be a little arrogant to presume that it was. But I've always enjoyed John Irving's book and the style, the way that he writes, and the dry humor that he puts in. I think I've tried to probably mimic a little bit of that.
Did you have any particular type of reader in mind when you were writing your book?
I did. Actually, we've kind of coined a term, my publisher and I. We call it the everyman concept. Everyman is actually on the title of the cover of my novel. A novel, like you normally see on a novel, we have an everyman novel. And what that means to me is I kind of borrowed it from Mark Twain. I think that Twain got people to read books that wouldn't normally read books. He got the everyman, the average working Joe, to go out there and buy his stuff. If you didn't like Huckleberry Finn, there was just something wrong with you. And it wasn't the elite that just read his books, it was everybody. And I like that concept because the last statistic I saw was that 5% of the American population is actually a regular, steady reader of fiction. And I think that that's sad. So I tried to create a novel that everybody would enjoy, and I think anyone from age 16 to 90 would enjoy this story. And the entire story takes place in 8 days, so it goes very quickly. It's broken up into 50 sub-chapters and give you regular breaks. For the everyman who's not used to reading a lot of novels throughout the year.
Your book title kind of struck me as being almost a text message, where instead of saying you, Y-O-U, you just use the letter U, got to have you some fun. Why did you choose that?
It was kind of a fluke. Linda, actually, initially the title came from a catchphrase that my family borrowed. My father flew helicopters in Vietnam. When I was in college, he went back to renew his helicopter pilot's license, and while he was in school in Gettysburg, he met a guy named Augustino Siena, and they would go running at night, and Augustino had some life lessons for my dad, and one of the catchphrases that Augustino said to my father was, "Hey, you got to have you some fun." So we kind of borrowed that phrase, and that's where the title came from. But the only reason I used the letter U instead of spelling out Y-O-U is because I thought a publisher might think that the title is too long, so I just was cutting down letters. But it does fit in with the text message crowd now.
You Got to Have You Some Fun is your first novel. Will you be bringing John Smith back in a sequel, or are you on to other things?
Actually, Linda, I don't have any interest in writing a similar story over and over again. I know a lot of famous authors do that, and I know a lot of publishers like that because it generates sales. But I'll bring in John Irving here. I think that one of our greatest American contemporary storytellers, John Irving, writes a drastically different book every time. And that's what I'd like to do. I think there are so many good stories out there that you can blend fiction and nonfiction. And I have several on my to-do list right now. It's just a question of affording the time and the research to do them properly.
On your website, you talk about authors supporting our troops. How did you get involved in this organization?
We donate a lot of books to a lot of different organizations. This one we were very fond of. In my novel, You Got to Have You Some Fun, there is an element, a military element. The main character has a son that was killed in the military. My father was military, so we found it's actually a husband and wife out of Florida, and the husband is an author, and I think the wife has a son or family member in the military. And what they do is they collect books from authors. They have to be brand new novels, and they have to be signed by the author. And they collect those, and they box them up, and they ship them overseas to all branches of the military in an active military combat zone. Because, there's not a lot to do, obviously, when you're sitting in the sand somewhere, and then they need recreation. So I think we sent about 70 copies.
What would you say is the primary message you want readers of your book to remember?
I think one of the main themes, although there are multiple themes in my novel, one thing that's very important to me is that we all need to learn how to accept change. Change is coming. You can't control it. You can only control how you handle it. And I think it's very important to not only accept change, but to embrace it, because it doesn't have to be a negative thing. It can actually be a positive thing. It all depends on your attitude towards change.
What kind of feedback have you had from readers of You Got to Have You Some Fun so far?
The feedback's been great, Linda. Any potential readers, go to my website, andrewharkless.com. They can click on multiple links there that'll direct them to Amazon. We have, I think, about 25 very positive reviews on Amazon.
Your website is a delight to go through, and on every page you say that you write stories for the everyman about the everyman. Tell us what you mean by that.
Well, I'm now 45, Linda, and although this is my debut novel, it took a lot longer than I thought. But I actually quit college when I was 20 years old, and shortly after I knew almost immediately what I wanted to do, and that was create great novels. But I knew as a 20-year-old I didn't have the life experience to write the kind of novels that I wanted. So I used bartending in order to travel and meet people and get out in the world and get dirty, per se, and just open to anything that came along.
If you could compare You Got to Have You Some Fun with any other book, what would that other book be?
I find similarities with my book with Winston Groom's Forrest Gump, actually.
Where can we learn more about you, and where can we purchase You Got to Have You Some Fun?
Linda, all the information is on my website, Andrew Harkless, AndrewHarkless.com, and there are multiple links there. My full bio is there. There are also some short stories. I have a blog page with several articles on it, and there are very obvious links that all you need to, future potential readers need to do is click on, and it'll take them directly to Amazon's website, where the book is available in ebook and print copies, both paperback and hardback.
Andrew, if you could tell us one thing about your book that would be the incentive for our listeners to read it, what would that one thing be?
After you read my novel, I think readers will get multiple different things out of it. I intended for there to be a certain catharsis to it, but I think ultimately at the end, the title, even though the title might make this book sound lighter than it actually is, in the end, there is a happy ending, and there is, I believe, a feeling that the reader gets that they actually went on a ride, per se, and it was fun and enjoyable, and they are happy at the end of the book.
Andrew, I've had a great time talking with you today. Thank you for joining us and for sharing You Got to Have You Some Fun with us. When you release your next book, will you come back and chat with us again?
I certainly will, Linda, and thank you for having me. It's been my pleasure.
Although a work of fiction, Harkless' book could easily be torn from the journal pages of any lost soul desperate to find answers about why existence can seem so cruel. Between the hilarious moments aboard a cruise ship to his philosophical musings of the strangers around him, average guy John Smith becomes something far more interesting, an empty vessel into which a reader can pour his own curiosities and existential thoughts. Hopefully, by the time the reader comes to the close, John Smith will have delivered some semblance of an answer, or at least lead you closer to asking the right questions. That came from a compilation of reviews I found on the web, and what a great way to close our show. I definitely have to read this book. This is Linda Thompson, concluding another edition of The Author Show. Please share this interview with your family and friends so that they too may have the opportunity to discover our guest and his work. And why not spread the word on social media as well? Please join us next time for another exciting author and another great book on The Author Show.
Thanks for listening to The Author Show. To contact us, call toll-free 1-877-955-8800. That's 877-55-8800. Or visit theauthorshow.com, theauthorshow.com. Tune in next time to another great author on The Author Show.